is the chief of police search process, led by the co-chairs. Which one of you all would like to jump on that one? Where do you think we should start on this?
Can I also just ask a question about this?
Yeah.
So I think Lisa, Emma and I have been contacted by the deputy mayor, and we have a meeting tomorrow morning. Is that right, Lisa? Anyway, so this will help me understand what's happening with that and why I've been summoned.
Okay.
I mean, I tried for months to get a meeting with this woman. All of a sudden, she calls me up and I have a meeting. What can I say? So obviously, this is important to her. I mean, I did have another meeting with her about other stuff. So, but this is
yes. So here's a couple of things that I know in my brief time back. There's the mayor has asked for a meeting with the co-chairs. That is going to happen today at 1:30.
Oh.
And so we've asked also for the agenda of that meeting. We have not received the agenda or the topic of that meeting. The assumption is that it has to do with the chief of police search. That's the assumption we have.
There's a lot of things we can talk about. That's probably the most important right now.
So what we can do is, after the meeting with the mayor, one of the questions that can be asked is maybe a follow-up of why the deputy mayor is asking to meet with each of you, Emma and Melinda and Lisa, and so that maybe we can have a better understanding and we can follow up with the three of you. We can follow up with the three of you later today. Is that
okay? Yeah,
is that okay?
just because.
But also, yeah.
I was like, good, she's finding me my $250,000. Not. Okay. Unless Lisa's helping me get it. Hey, Lisa? No.
Who's the deputy mayor again?
Shefali
Ragenthal.
Ragenthal?
Okay. Excuse me for not knowing.
Okay. So, with that said, I think maybe what I'll do is I think a lot of us kind of know to some degree what's been happening, but I think it would be valuable for folks who haven't been following everything to just get a sense of where we're at.
Can I have one clarification? There was a tweet by Brandy Cruz last night from Q13, and then a call by Steve, and I was like, saying that the CPC and the Chief of Police Committee would be meeting with the mayor. It sounded like it was one meeting. I asked for clarification from the mayor's office, and it's two separate meetings. Just FYI.
Okay, so as many of you know, and if you don't know, the search committee concluded its work about 2 weeks ago, and we finished on a Monday night. We ended up selecting 5 candidates to move forward in the process. And Reverend Williams, feel free to chime in as I give this background because you were there as well. At that meeting, there was a lot of discussion about what was going to happen next, moving forward. And our understanding was that the candidates that we move forward were going to enter into what was known as a competitive examination. And as that train rolls by,
As that train already left the station. Thank you.
perfect timing. So as that train rolls by, the candidates moved into what was known as a competitive examination. At that Monday night meeting where we made those 5 selections, the committee members asked quite a few questions about what the process was going to look like next. And it wasn't really clear. We weren't given a lot of clarity about how those examinations were going to be assessed, who was going to be assessing those. We just know that the agreement that we left that room with was that we were not going to be ranking individuals, and we were also not endorsing any one particular type of candidate. Rather, all 5 were viable candidates. That's the agreement that we left with. Jay.
Where did that number 5 come from? Was that part of your charge?
Good question, yeah. So the HR department was recommending to the committee that 5 candidates be selected. We could pick 6, we could pick 7, we could pick 4, but they didn't want us to pick 3. And the reason why they said 5 was because there was this competitive examination that was going to eliminate some folks from it. So again, we didn't know what that was going to look like. They just told us, we'd like for you to pick 5. So we picked 5, but not really clear as to how that was going to all work out, right? So I will also add, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was a request by the co-chairs at that point to endorse the process and to say that we had had a good process. Many of us on that committee decided to speak up and say we would not endorse a process that had not concluded, because clearly we were now in a phase that was secretive and we were not sure what was going to come out on the end. So that was Monday. The Friday where the candidates, the 3 candidates were announced, we had been told that 30 minutes prior to that announcement, we were going to get an email explaining which 3 had been picked and further instructions. That email came in 3 minutes before the announcement was made. And of course, because it was so late, because it did not accurately reflect what we had agreed to, and because the press conference itself had co-chairs making statements that were not in alignment with what the committee had agreed to, many of us became very upset and we felt disrespected. So essentially what happened at that point was that the mayor was given these 3 candidates, and now what they're doing is they're taking a tour and going to do site visits to the different locations where those chiefs, former chiefs have been, or current chiefs, have been working, and from there the mayor is to make a decision. Am I missing anything?
No, you're right on target.
Okay. So that has been...
Enrique, can I speak up for 1 second?
Sure.
Just in the aftermath of those events, some of us had looked at what happened in the past, and everything Enrique described is a departure from the past in which the so-called competitive examination that is required in the charter was completed through the selection committee process, and the selection committee only forwarded 3 names, so there was no further eliminating by any other entity. And also, last time in the process that selected Chief O'Toole, the vetting, the due diligence, trips to the originating cities of outside candidates took place before that culling, that final selection. So this is, in all those respects, a new process.
Thank you. I'd like to step away from the chair too, and also concur with Lisa. I was part of 2 search committees. One, Norm Stamper did not make the short list. I was part of that search committee, and Norm Rice did reach and appointed him anyway. He was not. And then I was also part of the 2010 selection when John Diaz was selected. He was also interim police chief at that time. And the charter says you offer 3 names. That's what the charter says. And we obeyed the charter. And so this is a departure. And I think for not speaking as a commissioner right now, but speaking from others for police accountability, we were disturbed that the assessors for the test were actually people who worked for the mayor. I mean, 3 of the assessors was deputy mayors, and the only qualified person to maybe assess a test was Vernon Malacan, because he had been a previous police chief and also a consultant to the mayor, Murray, when he first got elected. And so although Ron Sims was county exec, in the county you have a sheriff department. You have a sheriff, and he's not in charge of the sheriff department at all. It's an elected office, and the sheriff department is run under the office, under the sheriff that's elected, and not under the county as the police chief, as the police department is run under the city government. So it was a great departure and an alarming departure for us. So anyway.
Thank you. Reverend Williams, did you have anything to add?
Well, no, it just seemed to me that, that Monday meeting, I think, especially you were very clear on not endorsing, the process up until that point, because it appeared to be a smokescreen, for what, to cover that hidden agenda. And I
Which
think
was? Hidden agenda, which was?
to pretty much, to bypass Carmen.
I see,
And,
okay.
and, I mean, it was clear to me from at least 3 of the co-chairs that they had already made a decision,
Not to hire.
yeah, to go with an outsider. And some people with on the committee as well. But I think it was clear that there was a smokescreen there, and I think many of us felt uncomfortable with that. And but nevertheless, I thought we were on the same page. But when Friday came, it seemed to me that there was also an attempt to protect the mayor from making that decision in terms of knowing that Carmen was very well respected in the community, knowing that she pretty much had the endorsement of SPOG and others in the community. And so I think there was an attempt to protect her from having to make that decision.
Jay?
I had a question. This selection committee was not given the instruction that you're to look at only outside applicants for police chief.
No. And there were internal applicants throughout the process. And so we were never told to only look at outside candidates. Good question. Does anybody have any other questions? Yeah.
I have a few questions. So, when did the search committee find out that there would be 4 assessors or 5 assessors judging some kind of written examination?
My understanding, when we found out that there would be 4, I found out that there would be 4 on Friday. I didn't know how many there were going to be and who they were until Friday when they showed up at the press conference. I knew that there were these assessors, but I had no idea who they were, how many of them there were, and when they were going to be doing their work.
Is that something that you guys were told about at the beginning when you agreed to serve as search committee?
Yes. At the very, I think it was at one of the first meetings, we were told that there would be a competitive examination. We asked questions then about what that examination looked like. We were told that the information that we were looking for is in the charter. But beyond that, we weren't told what the questions would be, who would be assessing it. And as we pushed during the process to find that out, either those questions were not responded to, or the answers were very vague.
Speaking of vague answers, one of the things that's been really concerning to me is that different people, like at the press conference or in the written communications we've received from the mayor's office, that either we're using fuzzy language or I don't know what, but it seems like some of the answers are inconsistent. Some of the information that's being received is inconsistent. For example, it was made to sound as if the search committee was signing on to these final 3.
Yeah.
That was a recommendation of the search committee that these were the final 3. And there was a representation about ranking. And that's part of the confusion for me. Did the search committee have any role in drafting the questions for the written exam?
No.
One of the things that was said as to justify the decision was that there had been some kind of backsliding within the department. Was that something that the search committee found, like, that there had been backsliding?
I don't remember us talking about that. I mean, that was a conversation that came from that Monday night to Friday afternoon. If that talking point or that issue, that had been developed within that time period, but it was not something that the committee talked about. Let me touch on the three things that you mentioned briefly. The endorsement of the committee. I found it very suspicious when we were asked as a search committee to endorse a process prior to it finishing, and I told the committee that I was going to maintain my right to disagree with the process if it didn't arrive at an equitable conclusion. And so by doing that, I think, to me that was a hint that something secretive was about to happen. The second thing was the ranking. And the agreement was that we were not going to discuss any one particular candidate or any number of candidates being higher up or lower than any other candidate, and rather we were selecting all 5 to move forward. The way that ranking came out eventually was through email, that there was a discussion by some of the committee members that that ranking was assigned, or that certain candidates were higher up than others, and so that became available to the public. Even after we had agreed that that was not going to be discussed outside of any process that we had already been in a closed room and that kind of thing. And then finally, the outsider perspective is that former council member Tim Burgess said at the press conference that the committee was putting forward 3, actually it was Jeff Robinson who said we were putting forward 3, really we put 5 forward. Tim Burgess said that we were looking for an outside candidate, and if that was true, then why is it that we included an internal candidate among our 5? Mm-hmm. So the statement that we forwarded, we were only looking for external candidates, is just not true.
To be clear, was there ever an action item put to the search committee to vote on whether an outside candidate versus an inside candidate was preferred?
There was a discussion. There was not a vote. There was a discussion, and the discussion resulted in it being neutral, is that people saw pros and cons as to having an internal and an external candidate. I can tell you that some of the co-chairs felt like it should have been an outside candidate, but we never arrived at saying it has to be outside.
Did any of the search committee co-chairs consult with the search committee members during that week when they were whittling it down from 5 to 3?
To my
about
knowledge,
the substance?
To my knowledge, they didn't. I think, not to me. I don't know if to you.
Not to my knowledge as well.
I think the communication was cut off by Monday night from any other announcements until Friday.
Yeah.
I have a question related to that. The memo that has been disclosed from the 4 co-chairs, which went to the mayor about SPD, a 4-page memo, much of which I think is inaccurate. Was that ever shared with the rest of the committee, and were the contents of that memo something that had been discussed with the rest of you? Or did they come up with that completely on their own?
It was not discussed with us.
Well, it seems to me that there was some, one of our initial meetings, there was some reference to that, which they didn't give any details, but there was a reference to, you remember that?
Yeah. They said they were going to write in a memo, but they never told us what was going to be in it, or if we would get a copy of it or anything like that.
Yeah.
I have a question about that memo.
Uh-huh.
You did not see that memo until after the announcement? Is that right?
Correct.
Do you know who actually wrote the memo?
Yeah, who wrote it?
I don't.
Yeah, I'm interested in.
It's
that
supposedly
information
supposed to
together.
come from the co-chairs, but I don't know who drafted it.
Yeah.
Also
Okay.
seems that
I
somebody on the
have-
search
I had
committee,
asked one of the co-chairs about that and received no response.
Okay.
it seems like somebody on the search committee, had a discussion with the mayor's team at some point after you had forwarded the 5 candidates?
Well, the co-chairs were and continue to be in direct dialogue with the mayor about it. So the search committee members that, to my knowledge, are not. So the co-chairs have, access there.
And who are those?
The co-chairs are Colleen Echohawk, who I had hoped was going to be here but couldn't be here this morning. Tim Burgess, Sue Rahr, and Jeff Robinson from the ACLU. Okay, so I think that we have, that we need to talk about the outstanding request for information. Did you want to talk about that?
Sure. So before, we had a special meeting, not last Thursday, but Thursday before. And even before that, staff had sent out a request because we were starting to hear about this process involving competitive exams. And there was a lack of clarity about what the competitive exam was. And we were receiving information from the mayor's office that seemed designed to lead us to the conclusion that the whole process was a competitive exam. But then there were other indications that this competitive exam was the written part where there were answers. And we didn't know anything about the questions. We didn't know what the rules of the exam were. We didn't know how they were going to be graded, whether it was pass, fail. And honestly, we just didn't seem to be getting very clear information. So we did follow up a week and a half ago with some further questions. And then we've had one other follow-up request that I think is asking now some sharper questions to try to get to the bottom of what this process was. And I think what we're trying to, it's very fact-based. If I can just kind of back up a little bit. Yeah. We're in the accountability business, and there's a lot of pieces of accountability. And, if we are not doing our jobs, we're going to be accountable to the community. And I just think of other major decisions that get made, or whether it be when the city arrives at a collectively bargained agreement with a police union. We look at it from process, but we also look at substance, and the community has the right to say that is a bad deal for community, or that is a bad deal for accountability, and the people who made the decision to enter into those deals are accountable. So there's that substance part, but there's also the procedural part, which is like the whole point of having a process is to try to arrive at a better, sounder decision. And so these questions that we're asking now are about the process. They're about who came up with the process, when the process was made up, how it was communicated to search members, what the criteria were, how people were graded, how decisions were made. And I think that it's the CPC's role to try to get to the bottom of the facts, to try to figure out what happened, and so we can report it out. And if recommendations need to be made about future search committees, we need to be able to make those recommendations. And I will say that there's also the reason that CPC participates in these search committees. And so by being there, we're hoping to add value, but we're also lending the credibility that this body has to those processes. And so we need to know what we're getting into in the future. We also need to have our own policies, protocols, and procedures for how our members, who in this case have acted very well, how our members are expected to behave in those processes and what values they're expected to uphold. So there's lots of substantive reasons for these process-related questions. And right now we have not received a response. We do have this meeting with the mayor this afternoon, and we hope to maybe get some more information at that meeting. But I think we're going to have to wait for that information. Hopefully we'll get it, and if we don't get it, decide what the next step is.
Okay. So, okay.
Can I ask about that?
Go for it, Lisa.
We sent that letter 10 days ago or more, and there's not only not been a response substantively, there hasn't been acknowledgement of the request, as far as I know. If it had been a public records request, it would have required a response sooner than this. We, under ordinance, are supposed to get records that we need to do our work without the necessity of going through a formal public records request. We certainly aren't supposed to be at a disadvantage compared to a member of the public. And I think that the non-response to the inquiry, which is, you know, has been fairly widely reported, is itself a problem. So to me, in this meeting today, I hope that that as its own issue, that, you know, we expect a response, and this is part of our job, and it isn't like to be put off any further, is really an important piece. It's hard to get to the substance of what went wrong without accurate information, and whether something went wrong without accurate information.
Can I forward that comment and turn it into a question to Carlton about the length of time and what the possible remedy is for not receiving?
No, I can answer that question, but I prefer to do it in sort of a privileged setting.
Okay.
And we can follow up with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that sounds good. Jay, did you have a question? Okay. So I think, thanks for that, Lisa. I think what we'd like to do at this point is also talk a little bit about the community reaction and the concerns that have been very, very obvious in the community, and what people's responses have been. I can tell you from, you know, my other role as working for PDA and different community groups I'm a part of and whatnot, I have been organizing to respond to this on that front, not as a commissioner. I know that Reverend Walden has been working tirelessly as well. We both held press conferences the Tuesday after Memorial Day, and there were a number of folks who joined both of the press conferences and spoke out about what their feelings were. I think, to be quite frank, people are upset that Carmen has been left out, and that's not simply my own personal sentiment. You can ask folks in the community; they're very angry. This has been a process that has again shown that the city of Seattle has and continues to engage in systemic racism, and it has not been weeded out. So I don't know if you wanted to speak to some of the reactions.
Well, yes, stepping away from the chair and speaking from others, because we did call the press conference, and it was well attended, and Dr. Angela Rye, Dr. Andrea Rye, who's Angela Rye's mother. She's also was a human service person and worked at Shoreline Community College. And one of the things that she said, but this is really an EEO complaint. I mean, it went against all the rules, and that you never change the rules if they were not going to consider a local candidate. That should have been upfront going into the process. And a lot of the other community people are really upset that the first woman mayor, the first in 90 years, the first thing she did was crush a black woman. And it's really not going well in African American community at all. And just to see the process, and then people are wondering what's happened to, none of the candidates have had any experience on a consent decree. And now we're in sustainment phase, and you're going to bring somebody else in. How does that upset the apple cart? And also, another couple of ahas that come through is maybe people really don't want to solve crime. Because the only way you solve crime is you have to have people trusted. And so maybe the other thing is being circulated also is that maybe the South End has not been gentrified enough. In order for gentrification to roll on, you have to have an escalation of crime. And then if people get tired of crime, they sell their houses. It's a proven pattern that's been used all over America. Then after so many people sell their houses, then they come in with heavy law enforcement and harass the rest of the people there, and then they eventually move out. So it's a proven track record on how to gentrify. And so people in the African American community is really upset, and they are looking at getting some op-ed pieces in some of the other community, other newspapers in other cities, and also doing some other kinds of things. I mean, I mean, I think that, you know, in South Africa, they say when you strike a rock, when you strike a rock, when you strike a woman, you strike a rock, or something like that. And I just don't think that she understands the level of anger that's out there in the African American community, and especially women. And the other thing it looks like, see, people beginning to understand is that you can only be a chief, can only be considered to be a chief from being a chief. And so if you can't make the short list in your own city, what message does that send around? And so what it does is it crushes Carmen's opportunities to be selected to move from here, to leave Seattle. And we see it as a racist move. The women in Seattle, black women I've talked to, hundreds of black women now, and they're just really absolutely upset.
The other piece as well, after the press conferences that we had on Tuesday of last week, many of us went up to the council chambers and testified at the public hearing that was going on. And then I also want to report that this week, on Monday, I was at the council chambers, and prior to that meeting, Council President Bruce Harrell came up to me and mentioned that he would like to figure out if there's something that the council can do to support community folks who are trying to respond to this somehow. The only thing I can think of right now is that the council has the ability to withhold its confirmation. After Mayor Durkin makes her decision, she does have the ability to withhold her, the council has the ability to withhold a confirmation because they have to go through that process. If they would be willing to do something at that point, I think is where they can. The other piece, of course, I think is that just as you know, along the lines of what Reverend Walden was saying, Reverend Walden and I have been outspoken in the media, and we've been not hiding what this process has been. And one of the things that came up yesterday when I was on KOW with my colleague Tara Moss from the Public Defender Association, she mentioned that that there are many folks who have felt a sense of pride having one of their own, a black woman from their own community, elevated to the level of interim chief. But what does it say to community folks when that interim chief is not even considered as somebody who could potentially lead their own city in this process? And so I think that it is it's a disheartening, disrespectful, and racist process that is unfolded. And I think that Seattle often likes to pretend that it's more progressive than it really is. When stuff like this comes up, and then we wonder why we're still having shootings, why we're still having bias, why people are not getting hired to some of the top positions in the city. It's no wonder, because I think that we like to, as a city, pretend that things are going well when really they're not. So I think now we have a question as to whether or not, like, what's the next step?
Can I have one more comment?
Yeah.
Another comment too is people said, Minneapolis, I mean, you know, I mean, that's where Philando was shot, you know, I mean, he was the guy. And so they've had a different training of the police department there. I mean, you got this guy who's going around training police officers, you know, I mean, we're talking about de-escalation, and there's a new training out there that said, well, the officers just want to go home that night. And so maybe the de-escalation training is not what's going on at that police that's happening in that city. And so contrary to what we're trying to do here in Seattle, some of these other people are coming from other kind of departments, and the police chief that's been recommended from Pittsburgh, he was actually recruited to apply, and also he had a vote of no confidence. In 2 years he stepped down, and so if you look at Carmen's records alongside the other people's records, hers is stellar. And even Gil Krolikowski, the previous police chief here, was an article in the Seattle Times. So, you know, I mean, it's something desperately wrong here in Seattle, And we have to be willing to stand up about this and not being bullied.
And thank you. So in terms.
Again, I was speaking for my, not as a chair, I stepped away from the chair.
The mayor, as Isaac was mentioning, the mayor's meeting, we're having a meeting with the mayor today at 1:30. And then we'll also be, Reverend Williams will be in a meeting as well this afternoon with the search committee. It's hard to know what the mayor's plan is and what is gonna be talked about there. I can speculate, but at this point I think I'd rather just hold off and wait and find out what she has to say. I know that people have been speaking out about it, so we'll have to wait and see. What we could possibly do, I think what we can commit to is sending out an email about what is talked about, if it's public, okay?
I would suggest potentially a special meeting,
Oh, okay.
so that we can update
And we
folks.
can, this is Claudia, if you can let us know, I'm talking about behalf of CMAR.
Sure.
I know you've been trying to organize with different communities. Please let us know how can CMAR be supported in your efforts.
Absolutely. So Fez mentioned that we could potentially have a special meeting after, at some point after this meeting,
Yeah,
after the
with
meeting.
24-hour notice, yes.
Yeah.
For,
To talk about.
What
So
ever
we're
comes
meeting
up.
tomorrow morning at 9:30.
Yeah, we can call you directly.
Lisa?
This is Lisa. I think that there is reaction to come to the political evolution of this, how the mayor responds, what she tells you this afternoon, what we see occurring. I think there is presently a process issue that is our actual responsibility to address, potentially in collaboration with the Inspector General. I don't think that, other than the information that we've already asked for and not been given, I reiterate, I think that is an issue. If we can't timely respond with good information, we're being neutered. So I think, we have to have, it shouldn't take a long time to provide the information that we requested. But when we have that information, or if we're denied it, to me, there is a present obvious issue and problem that may require us to consult with experts on equal employment opportunity, but I don't think that we need to wait for future events to tell us that there is a problem. When people disappear, not for qualification reasons, but for unnamed reasons, or because some qualification that had not been previously announced was suddenly imposed midway through a process, that is exactly what, any equal employment opportunity risk management lawyer is going to flag as, a huge opportunity for bias and for allegations of bias. That is exactly what appears to have happened. I didn't realize until you all recited, the experience of the search committee, but that you were asked not to limit your selection to 3. I mean, it was just, you were asked to give them the opportunity to do unexamined, unaccountable, further selection based on unknown criteria that wasn't based on qualification. And I think it would be very, very difficult. The mayor doesn't have any obligation to pick a particular person, but I think it'd be very difficult to make the argument that Chief Best wasn't qualified or among the most qualified people for this job. Beyond that, there may be, sort of optional choices to make, but the search committee found her to be qualified, among the top qualified people, and then suddenly she disappeared. She was the only woman in the group. And she has a demonstrated track record of work in the department that, when associated with Kathleen O'Toole, is vaunted as, one of the most amazing accomplishments in American policing today, and when associated with Chief Best somehow disqualifies her. That doesn't fly for me. That is really flagrant double standard in play. So to me, our responsibility is to pursue that process problem at this point, regardless of who ultimately is picked to be the police chief. And I think it's something that we could reach out to the Inspector General to join us in further exploring.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Jay?
I'm a mayoral appointee on the commission. And the current mayor has yet to follow through on the process for my next 3 years. And I'm halfway through that, one of those years. And as an original commissioner, I'm going to sit here until all of the positions are filled. Now saying that, I'm willing to put that support by the mayor on the line here and stand with the city council to not approve the final appointee. Not support that.
Well, I think that you hit on one of the big problems here, which is that the search committee found that these 5 were qualified, right? At least so far as that research. But now, the problem with changing the process in between is that it threatens to harm the legitimacy of all the candidates to survive. And that's really unfortunate for whoever does get hired. I mean, at this point, even for Interim Chief Carmen Best, I mean, the whole process seems tainted. And, you know, how do you change, you know, the reason we're here is to try to, one of the reasons is to build trust between the community and police. And the decision to exclude the, you know, our interim chief who was picked by the mayor to serve in that capacity, and who are, you know, actually went back to read our accountability ordinance over the weekend, and it's right baked into the ordinance where it says that Chief O'Toole and her staff have made these amazing strides in police reform. It's in the legislation. And then to see this happen in the way that it's happened, so that she doesn't even get an interview, is not a step in the right direction in building trust between the community and police in Seattle.
You know, I think that, you know, I've been here for 10 years now. I've watched Carmen serve in the second chair, you know, under John Diaz, for the interim with Harry Bailey, and then under Chief O'Toole. And she has been very present, serving as their right-hand person in the community, especially when they went into communities of color. She was right there with them to be almost a mouthpiece for them, a spokesperson for them. And to see her serve in that capacity faithfully through the reform process, and then after these 10 years to not be considered to move forward, because it was stated at one point that in order to really bring about reform, you need an outsider. So in their mind, Carmen could not bring about reform, but she's been doing it for 10 plus years, bringing about reform. So I think that's a slight against her when you don't look at not only her record as having an impeccable record, but also having a commitment to reform, working under a consent decree. So I really think the mayor needs to reconsider. I mean, whenever you add a process, when you add a process into the search process, when you add another process that's a departure from the past, means that there's a hidden agenda, you know. So I just felt like I needed to say that because I think Chief Best deserves to be moved forward. And
So we're scheduled to talk about this until 10:15. It is now 10:15. I want to go quickly to Melinda, and then I think Colleen joined us. I want to give her a little bit of time to speak as well.
So I want to also express my support for Chief Best, and just from our experience and her history, you know, again, and the people I hear about. But I just want to be clear, okay, because I'm trying to follow this
Yeah,
from a,
me too.
a little bit lost. So we had members on there, we were told to select as many as we wanted for qualified candidates to move forward. We're not told there was a limit, right? That's fundamentally, I'm getting really rudimentary, right? The committee moved 5 forward, and then they changed the process and put a test in place.
No. So we were asked, it was strongly suggested that we move 5.
Okay,
So we picked those 5, but from the very get-go, we were told that there would be a competitive examination.
okay,
What that examination was gonna be, how it was going to be
Right,
assessed
we
and all
didn't
that,
know.
we didn't
Okay.
know that.
so did Carmen participate in the competitive test?
Yes, because she was among the 5.
Okay, so all 5 of them were brought to that, and then it was after that only 3 were selected.
It was after.
Move forward.
Those were moved forward by the assessors.
Yeah.
Right, the
Not
test
by
of
the-
assessment.
Not by the
Which-
selection.
Not by the
committee.
selection committee.
Those assessors were those.
So there was a competitive
Sorry, this
test,
is-
and then 3 were, yeah.
Just say, this, I think what's important is that no one knows what the quote unquote the test was.
Right.
There's a written examination, but Ian's response to our earlier questions said that the test to be administered included the entire selection process.
So one part wasn't supposed to be weighted any more than another.
Well,
I mean, ultimately, I'll just say this, ultimately, it's obviously the mayor's choice, and in the final selection, you know, she has to think about chemistry and all that other kind of stuff, and I get that. I guess that our concern is that the second level of assessment was not transparent. We have no reason why Carmen
That's right.
Best was eliminated from the top 3. We have no rationale for that or what that was about. And the concern here is that she is not part of the final 3 that are being considered for the job based on her experience. And somehow it's based on this non-transparent test that we don't understand what the criteria was.
and
Is
the
that,
only-
is that,
that's accurate.
Okay.
And the only rationale that we've been
because I don't
given,
think we can tell the mayor who to hire.
No,
But
that's not-
the only rationale that we've been
I
given
think we'd be off base.
was by Tim Burgess when he said that to some degree,
He didn't believe an insider could do it.
Carmen being an insider worked against her, and that we, the committee, felt that an outsider was needed. And I can tell you that that's just not true. That's not what we concluded.
Yeah.
Okay.
Colleen, I want to give you a chance also. I know you just joined us, but we've been having a discussion about the chief selection process. I wanted to see if you had anything you wanted to add. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, everyone, that I wasn't able to be there in person. I really was trying my best to prioritize this meeting. However, I will be going out to the different sites to help interview references for the next chief of police, and my schedule has gotten incredibly tight, and I had to meet with my low-income housing project this morning. So, anyways, it's kind of a lame excuse, but it's still part of my world right now. Yeah, thank you, Enrique, for just giving me this time. As you guys know, it's been an incredibly difficult process. It's been eye-opening in many ways. I think that my role as one of the co-chairs became pretty apparent early on in really trying to do my best to hold the space for all of our community members and to give our committee, the community members that were part of the committee, and to do all I could to offer openness and transparency through the process. I think that there was some really good consensus in our meetings. I will absolutely 100% am behind that. We forwarded 5 people towards the competitive exam, including Carmen, and that was my role as part of the committee and as the co-chair And we did that, and then from there, you know, there was other things that have happened. So I guess that's all I have to say right now. If you have, you know, questions of me, I'm more than happy to answer and give any further insight that I can.
Isaac?
Hi Colleen, this is Isaac. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, Isaac. Sure.
Was there a vote, to your knowledge, to go from 5 to 3, but a vote taken to pick those final 3?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Were you involved in a discussion trying to arrive at, I mean, not you, but the search committee co-chairs? Were the search committee co-chairs involved in any discussion trying to reach consensus on that final 3?
No, we had a responsibility to come to bring, you know, forward our observations, our what we heard from the committee, and we brought forward 5 candidates. We talked about the process and brought forward all the candidates.
Right. And that memo that has been released from the committee co-chairs, who wrote that?
That was, I'm not exactly sure who wrote all of it. It was definitely a collaborative process. It went back and forth
Okay.
a couple of times between all of the co-chairs.
Okay.
Colleen,
And
this is,
where was the information from that memo is based on? Where did that come from?
I'm not exactly sure how to answer that, Lisa. I would assume it came from Tim and Sue, and with some input from Jeffrey and myself. But they are the ones who have, you know, the more in-depth experience around policing.
Colleen,
Colleen, can I ask, was Peter Holmes involved in any of that information that was included in that letter?
No.
and Colleen, why is it that the search committee members didn't receive that memo?
I don't know exactly, okay? I'm not sure. I think it comes, wasn't it like right after? I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that.
Okay.
I don't want to make assumptions.
Okay. So I guess one of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention, you and I have had some discussion over email with the search committee, and I know that one of the things that we've brought up, some of the search committee members, is what you all as co-chairs can do moving forward. And my understanding, as you mentioned, was that your role as co-chair was wrapping up. However, I understand that you and the co-chairs are going to be going on site visits. And so I guess the question is, what do you see your role and how do you feel about influencing this process going forward, given that so many community members are very upset with how the process has transpired?
Well, I absolutely want to do my best to influence this process and be involved. And that's exactly why I'm calling you today and was trying to prioritize actually being at the meeting. I welcome all of your input as I move forward on this part. I would have to confirm this with the mayor's office, but I don't know if I'm necessarily continuing my role as a co-chair now as I go on site visits. I think it's more just I was asked as one of the committee members to go on the site visits. It will be myself, Tim Burgess, and Ian from the mayor's office who will go out. But I'm very, very happy to hear everyone's thoughts, opinions, any questions you think that I should be asking, all of the references as we head out. I welcome them.
So Colleen, so does that mean that when you are at these different sites, you are going to not identify as a co-chair of the search committee?
I don't know for sure about that.
Okay.
On
Does anybody?
the site visits,
And I
Colleen, when
can I just real quick, Enrique? I'm happy to find that and answer that. I'm not trying to be dodgy about that. I
Okay.
really don't know.
Okay.
I can work on that.
Okay, Lisa?
this is, sorry, I just noticed that when a similar team went out exploring how Inspector General arrangements work in cities that have something analogous to our current Inspector General for Public Safety. And Betsy Graff and Isaac and Enrique went on those, along with Ian, Councilman Gonzalez, and council staff.
And Burgess.
They met with community leaders who we participated in identifying as kind of our counterparts in those cities who would be expected to have a potentially critical lens. And I'm wondering if your visit process is going to include talking with folks like that, and whether or not we should be identifying such sources. I think we can, and I think that made those visits on the IG play out in a substantially different way than they would have in the absence of those more community activist connections.
Yes, 100 times yes. I love that. I would welcome any recommendations. And from the CPC, it would be great if we had all of those recommendations. This is happening like really fast, and one thing I sent on to the mayor's team yesterday was just a request to meet with people who, because I'm working homelessness primarily, people who are working in the homeless community, people who are working in groups like the Community Police Commission, and then also Native communities as well.
So Colleen, I need to, I need to bring this to a close. We have a couple of other items.
Sure.
I want to thank you for having joined us, but before you go, I just wanted to express, as a search committee member, I need to be quite honest and frank and saying that this process continues to be, and continues to feel very secretive. It feels like it's lacking transparency. And the site visits are continuing to raise red flags with me on how this is going and where we're going to arrive. I urge you, in whatever capacity you have, to raise these issues and to try and find some type of resolution that is accountable, that is satisfactory to community members, because I think our role, not just as search committee members, but as members of this commission, is that we respond in a way that community sees fit. And I don't believe that right now, as a search committee, we're doing the work that the people want us to do. So I urge you to find a way to speak to the hearts of the mayor's staff and her team and figure out how we resolve this in a more productive way, because the way it's going right now, the way that you have described the site visits, it is going to continue going down a dark path. And I'm not happy with that. I'm very concerned. And I'm just very, very worried.
Well, I appreciate your concern, and I thank you for the warning. I also would just present that I'm here on the call. I am doing everything I can possibly do to continue to make this a transparent process. I welcome, like I said, any feedback, anything that I can, and anything I hear from community that I can to bring forward on these site visits. I believe that strongly in the community and hearing from the community and doing all we can to make this a better process. So please know that I am doing all that I can, and will continue to be pressing on things that I don't think are right as we move the process forward. So I'm definitely aligned with what you're saying, Enrique, and really welcome further feedback, and we'll do everything I can to implement that in the process.
Colleen, could I, speaking from my perspective in the Native community, I'm also concerned about you providing Native cover for this flawed process to the mayor. So, in my opinion...
Do you want to explain what do you mean by cover?
Native cover? It's a flawed process. We all here have discussed it and have, in all our collective opinion, agreed. So, as a Native woman, you going out there and standing by them and by the mayor, by abstention means that you approve it. And I'd rather you not do that, but I understand your goal is to help improve the process moving forward. So may the Creator bless you in that effort, but I would caution.
I don't really know how to respond to that today. If you want to talk about that offline.
We can. You bet.
I'm gonna bring it to a close, but have Isaac has one last comment.
Very quick, I think everyone who has spoken has, at this table, including Colleen, has expressed some level of concern with how this process has played out. And the CPC has sent off its request for documents, and we're hopefully going to get those documents, and the discussions continue, and we need to get to the bottom of it. Just want to remind everyone that the CPC itself has not actually issued any findings or made any recommendations at this point. I think it's important to go in the right order, which is what we're doing right now, which is we're expressing the concerns that we can see, making the request for information. Once we have that, or once we're told we don't get it, then we can make the next decision about what we need to do.
Colleen, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're busy, but hopefully we can stay in touch about what's going on, and we'll stay in communication.
For sure, and everyone please feel free to text me, call me. I really appreciate all the communication that's going on. And yeah, I'm sorry that I couldn't be there in person. It truly is one of these crazy days, so thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Colleen.
Thanks, bye.
Yeah. So I think this is a good point for maybe just to take a quick break. Let's take a 10-minute break.
I need the three of you first
Yeah.
before anything.